She smirked at my father's funeral while texting her secret lover. That was the moment I stopped being her husband and started being her ghost. No shouting, no tears, just silence and a plan. 3 weeks later, she walked into our house and froze. The photos? Gone. The locks? Changed. And on the mirror, one sentence in dust. I was always here. You just never saw me. She thought I disappeared, but I didn't vanish. I took everything, quietly. It was quiet at the funeral. Not the respectful kind of quiet, the kind that wraps around your throat and makes it hard to breathe. The kind where no one looks you in the eye, but you feel their judgment anyway. I stood next to my father's casket while everyone else moved through the motions, murmured condolences, a few forced hugs, and then quick steps to get back to their cars. Sarah stood beside me, but not really. She was scrolling on her phone. Her nails were done in a bright coral color that somehow felt wrong for the day. I watched her thumb swipe up, pause, tap. Not once did she squeeze my hand. Not once did she look at me. When the pastor finished speaking, people started drifting off. A few of my father's old army buddies nodded at me as they passed. One of them muttered something like, "He was a good man," and I just nodded back. What was I supposed to say? He was the only person who ever really saw me. And now he was gone. I looked over at Sarah. She was already walking back toward the car, heels clicking on the gravel, head down, texting. She didn't wait for me. It wasn't like she hated him. She just never really cared. Never asked about him. Never wanted to visit. She always said things like, "He makes me uncomfortable," or "He's too quiet." But he wasn't quiet. Not with me. He just didn't waste words on people who didn't listen. I stayed by the casket a little longer than everyone else. The sky was a flat gray. No wind, no sun. Just the kind of sky that makes everything feel heavier. I rested my hand on the wood. It was smooth and warm from the sun earlier that morning. "Thanks for everything," I whispered. I'm not sure what I meant by that. Maybe for teaching me how to fix a leaky pipe, or for the times he picked me up from school without saying a word but knowing I'd had a rough day. Maybe just for always being there, even in silence. I turned around and saw the car already running. Sarah was in the passenger seat. She hadn't even sat behind the wheel. Just waited for me to drive us home, like nothing had happened. The drive was long and wordless. I kept my eyes on the road. She kept hers on her phone. Occasionally she sighed, like this whole thing had been an inconvenience. Like burying my father had interrupted her weekend plans. At one point, I looked over and said, "You okay?" She nodded without looking up. "Yeah, just tired." That was it. Tired. Not sorry. Not sad. Not, "How are you holding up?" Just tired. When we got home, she walked inside, kicked off her shoes, and went straight to the kitchen to make a smoothie. I stood in the hallway for a second, holding the keys in my hand, staring at the spot on the wall where we used to keep a photo of my dad holding me on his shoulders. She'd taken it down months ago during some redecorating spree. I didn't say anything. I just walked to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the floor. That's when the thought hit me, not like a scream, but like a whisper that's been there all along. She wasn't really with me. She never had been. The days after the funeral blurred together. People say grief comes in waves, but for me, it just sat there, like fog that refused to lift. I went back to work sooner than I should have, not because I wanted to, but because sitting in that house with Sarah felt lonelier than being in a quiet office. She didn't mention my dad once. Not when I got home. Not when I stared too long at my untouched dinner. Not when I walked in with red eyes after sorting through old photos. She didn't ask what I found. She didn't even ask if I was okay. 3 days after the funeral, I came home to find her packing a weekend bag. Floral print, her favorite. She zipped it up and set it gently by the door like it was a purse, not a declaration. I stood there, keys still in hand. Going somewhere? She didn't flinch. Just kept scrolling through her phone, probably checking hotel reservations. "Yeah," she said casually. "Me and Heather are doing a girls' trip. Just need to get away. I've been drained lately." I waited for her to say something more. Anything. Maybe. "You should come too." Or, "Is that okay with you?" But she didn't. She didn't even look up. "Right," I muttered. She kissed my cheek without meaning it and left. When the door closed, it felt final. I stood there for a while, listening to the silence that followed. That kind of silence is louder than anything else. I walked through the house, past the photos we never updated, the half-decorated guest room, the empty dinner table. The place looked like a life paused halfway, like someone started building a home but gave up before it ever became one. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the way she walked ahead of me at the funeral, The way her eyes never met mine. The way she didn't even ask if I was okay after losing the only parent I had left. That thought repeated itself like a drumbeat in my chest. She wasn't with me. She never was. And then I remembered something from the funeral, something I hadn't paid attention to in the moment. My cousin, Tom, had flown in from out of state. He came up to me quietly and said, "Sarah didn't introduce you to anyone." Huh? I just shrugged back then, too numb to care. But now that memory clawed its way to the surface. He was right. Sarah hadn't brought me around to meet her extended family once that day. Not a name, not a gesture. I was just there, standing by her side like someone she'd hired for emotional support. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through our old messages, looking for something, a trace of warmth, maybe. But all I found were logistical texts. Pick up milk. Dinner with my mom tomorrow. Don't forget your appointment. Not a single "I miss you." Not a "How are you holding up?" Not one sentence that told me I still mattered to her. Around 3 a.m., I sat at the edge of the bed and stared into the dark. I didn't cry. I didn't feel rage either. Just a kind of stillness, like I'd finally stopped lying to myself. This wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a contract neither of us had read before signing. And somewhere in the silence, I made a decision. I didn't know what the end would look like yet, but I knew this. I wouldn't beg to be seen anymore. Saturday came and went without a word from Sarah. I didn't text her. Didn't ask if she was safe or where exactly she'd gone. The truth is, I didn't want to know. I was afraid I already did. I spent that day in my dad's house, the one he'd lived in since I was a teenager. It still smelled faintly like old wood and pipe smoke, familiar, quiet, real. I walked through the rooms like a stranger visiting a memory. Dust coated most of the furniture. The walls still held the framed maps he used to collect. He used to say they reminded him that no matter where you are, there's always somewhere else to go. I ended up in the garage. His tools were still neatly lined up on the pegboard, like he might come back at any minute and scold me for leaving them out of order. I sat on the old stool by his workbench and pulled open a drawer. Inside were a few faded photographs, a rusted compass, and a leather-bound journal with his initials burned into the cover. I took the journal back into the house and sat at the kitchen table. The first few pages were just notes, house repairs, dates, sketches of plumbing routes. But about halfway through, the writing changed. It got personal. One line stopped me cold. "Some people will never see you. And the ones who pretend to, they're the ones that hurt the most." I read it 3 times. My father wasn't the poetic type, but this was a wound talking. I didn't know who he wrote it for. Maybe my mother. Maybe someone else. But I felt it like it was written for me. That line echoed in my chest as I locked up the house and drove home. When I stepped through the front door, something felt off. Not loud. Not obvious. Just different. The air smelled like cheap perfume. The lamp in the hallway was turned a different direction. And on the kitchen counter, a glass with red lipstick on the rim. Sarah didn't wear red lipstick. I stood there for a long minute, staring at that glass. The fridge hummed in the background. Somewhere down the hall, a floorboard creaked, old wood settling, or maybe something else. My heart didn't race. I didn't panic. I just knew. She hadn't gone on a girls' trip. Or maybe she had. But she didn't go alone. And she definitely hadn't stayed away. I walked to the bedroom, opened the drawer where she usually kept her rings and bracelets. Her wedding band was in there, off her finger, lying in a little ceramic dish like it meant nothing at all. Still, I didn't say a word. I didn't throw things or call her or wait for a fight. Instead, I went to the closet and pulled out a duffel bag. I didn't pack it, not yet. I just unzipped it, placed it on the bed, and stared at it. I needed time, not to figure out what to do. I already knew I wouldn't stay, but I needed to see how far this would go. I needed her to think I was still blind. Because sometimes silence isn't retreat. It's recon. The next morning, she returned like nothing had happened. Hair curled, sunglasses on, coffee in hand. She walked in humming some pop song, tossed her bag by the door, and gave me a passing glance like I was the neighbor, not her husband. "Trip was great," she said casually, slipping off her shoes. "We should go to the coast sometime. Heather found this cute little resort." I didn't answer. Just nodded and sipped my own coffee. She didn't notice the duffel bag tucked behind the armchair. She didn't see how the framed photo of our wedding, the one by the TV, was missing. I'd taken it down the night before and stuffed it in a drawer. I didn't want to look at it anymore. That smile on her face in the picture felt like a lie now. Maybe it always had been. She disappeared into the bathroom and started running the shower. I sat there on the couch, staring at the sunlight slicing through the blinds. Dust floated in the beam like ash. And for a moment, it hit me, the way everything looked normal. How betrayal could sit quietly in the corners, not screaming, not bleeding, just breathing, calmly, like it belonged there. Later that afternoon, I drove back to my father's house. There was something about the silence there that made things clearer. I brought the journal back with me, wanting to read the rest. I sat in his old recliner, flipping through pages that had nothing and everything to do with me. Another line caught me. Legacy isn't money. It's how they remember you when you're not around to explain yourself. I closed the book and just sat there. My father didn't leave behind much. No business, no big estate, no hidden fortune. But he left words. And those words were sharper than anything Sarah had ever said to me. I stood up and wandered into the room we'd used for storage. Boxes, old coats, Christmas decorations we never hung anymore. And tucked behind one of the shelves was something I'd forgotten existed, a sealed envelope with my name on it. The handwriting was his. I recognized the loops and slants instantly. I didn't open it. Not yet. I slipped it into the journal and took them both home. When I got back, Sarah was on the phone. She was laughing, that breathy, flirty kind of laugh I hadn't heard directed at me in over a year. She saw me and waved, finger pressed to her lips as if I was interrupting something delicate. I didn't ask who she was talking to. I didn't care. Because I already knew. Not the name, but the pattern. I walked past her, into the bedroom, and quietly started organizing the contents of the duffel. Not everything, just enough to get by. I wasn't running yet, but I was preparing. That night, she curled up beside me in bed and scrolled through her phone. The light from her screen lit up the side of her face. She looked peaceful, comfortable. I stared at the ceiling. It wasn't rage I felt. It wasn't heartbreak either. It was distance. Like I'd already left and was just waiting for my body to catch up. And somewhere in that silence, I remembered a question my father once asked me when I was a kid, long before Sarah ever came into my life. What's worse, son, being forgotten, or never being seen at all? Back then, I didn't understand the difference. Now, I did. The next few days passed like I was watching someone else's life. Sarah moved through the house in her usual rhythm, working late, scrolling endlessly, pouring wine she never offered to share. If there was guilt in her eyes, I couldn't see it. She was good at this. Too good. I began noticing patterns I had ignored before. Her phone always face down. The quick swipes to clear notifications when I walked into the room. The bathroom door locked when it never used to be. The laughter from behind it, muffled and low. But I didn't confront her. I didn't ask questions I already knew the answers to. Instead, I made space in the silence. I started sleeping on the edge of the bed, back turned, breathing shallow so I wouldn't wake her. I began eating my dinners in the garage, just me and the smell of motor oil and old wood. Sometimes I'd sit there for hours with the journal open in my lap, rereading lines that now felt like prophecies. Sometimes, to be free, you've got to let them bury the version of you they built. One evening, I got a call from Tom, the same cousin who had mentioned Sarah's strange behavior at the funeral. He hesitated before speaking, and that told me everything. Hey, Dan. I wasn't going to say anything, but I saw her last night. Downtown. She wasn't with Heather. My throat tightened. You sure? Positive. I didn't approach her or anything. Just thought you should know. I thanked him, told him I appreciated it, and hung up. I didn't feel anger. Just confirmation. Sarah came home an hour later with shopping bags in hand and a faint perfume on her coat that wasn't hers. She smiled like she had nothing to hide. I smiled back like I had nothing to lose. That night, I finally opened the envelope from my dad. It wasn't a letter, not in the traditional sense. No, I love you, son, or take care of yourself. It was legal paperwork. Ownership documents for the lake house, the one Sarah had always assumed we would sell someday. Only my name was on the deed. And attached was a note, short and clean. I never trusted her. This is yours. Only yours. I sat there holding the paper, heart pounding, eyes burning. It wasn't just about the property. It was about being seen. My dad had seen what I wouldn't. Or maybe what I couldn't. I placed the documents in my duffel bag, zipped it halfway, and exhaled. Something inside me shifted that night. Not a snap. Not a collapse. Just a quiet shedding, like a snake slipping free from dead skin. In the days that followed, I began making arrangements. Quietly, carefully. I met with a lawyer. I redirected my paycheck to a private account. I started moving small things out of the house. Things Sarah wouldn't notice were missing: my father's watch, the fishing knife he gave me, a few shirts she never touched anyway. Sarah didn't notice. Or maybe she didn't care. She had stopped seeing me long before I started disappearing. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was becoming invisible, but not by accident. This time, it was on purpose. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. It had her touches everywhere, the scented candles I never lit, the throw pillows with quotes I never understood, the abstract art she insisted brought texture to the walls. But none of it felt warm. None of it felt like a place I belonged. I moved through the rooms quietly, not as a husband, but as a tenant waiting out the lease. Even my toothbrush had been moved to the far end of the sink, like I was some overnight guest she forgot to kick out. The silence between us wasn't cold. It was worse, it was neutral. Like we were both actors in a play that stopped being staged, still hitting our marks out of habit. One evening, she came home later than usual. No explanation. Just walked in humming again, heels clicking, jacket still warm from someone else's car. She poured herself a glass of wine, sat on the couch, and asked, "Did you remember to call the landscaper?" That was it. Not, "Hi." Not, "How was your day?" Just a question about the hedges. I looked at her, really looked, and I realized something that stopped me cold. She thought I was still in this. Still circling her orbit, still playing my part. I nodded. Yeah, I handled it. She smiled like everything was fine. And that was the moment I knew. She had no idea she'd already lost me. That night, I took the final steps. I booked a storage unit. Small, cheap, out by the edge of town. I started moving things piece by piece, clothes, tools, the photo album she never opened. I packed in silence, always when she was gone. I memorized the creaks in the hallway and the exact time the neighbor's dog barked during his nightly walk. I moved like a man erasing footprints. I left the essentials behind. I needed her to think nothing had changed. But everything had. One afternoon, while cleaning out my father's garage, I found an old photo tucked into the back of his toolbox, me as a kid, holding a fish half my size, grinning like I'd caught the moon. He stood behind me in the photo, one hand on my shoulder, looking down like I was the whole world. I stared at that photo for a long time. He'd seen me, not just as a son, but as someone who mattered. And Sarah? She hadn't looked at me like that in years. The final crack came on a Sunday morning. We were sitting at the table, each with our coffee, and out of nowhere, she said, "You know, if we ever did sell the lake house, we could finally get that European trip. Paris, Rome, you know, live a little." I didn't flinch, didn't blink. "You think it's ours?" I asked calmly. She looked up, confused. "Well, yeah. I mean, after your dad passed." I nodded slowly. "You should read the deed sometime." She stared at me, unsure if I was joking. I wasn't. She laughed it off. "Oh, come on. You know I don't care about paperwork." Exactly. She never cared about the details. Only the outcomes that served her. And I realized right then she was already planning what came next. The sale. The split. Her share. Maybe even a quiet exit. But she had no idea. I had already left her. She just hadn't noticed the empty space yet. From that Sunday on, I didn't play the role anymore. I still answered her when she spoke. I still took out the trash, folded the laundry, loaded the dishwasher, but I wasn't in it. I wasn't really there. Not in the way she assumed I was. My hands were moving through the routines, but my mind had already moved on. The house felt like a theater. She kept putting on performances, laughing loudly on calls, posting smiling selfies in our kitchen, tagging me in posts like we were still that couple. I didn't like or comment once. She never asked why. It hit me just how much of our marriage had been for show. Dinners for friends, date nights for social media, anniversaries for status. And all the while, I had mistaken proximity for love. I started staying later at work. No real reason. I just needed air that didn't smell like her perfume or sound like her carefully scripted small talk. One evening, I stopped by the lake house. I hadn't been there since my father passed. It was quieter than I remembered. The porch light still worked. The water still whispered against the dock. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. No alarm system. No blinking lights. Just wood floors that creaked under my boots and silence that didn't feel hollow. I walked room to room, turning on lights, checking windows, seeing what needed fixing. There was a small leak under the kitchen sink. A dead light bulb in the hallway. Dust coated every shelf. But it was mine. And more importantly, she had never set foot in it. That thought gave me a strange comfort. This was a place untouched by her world. A place she hadn't poisoned with her smirks or silence. A place I could rebuild from. Back at the house, she was asleep when I returned. Curled up on her side, blanket pulled tight, phone charging next to her pillow like it was more important than I ever had been. I stood there in the doorway for a moment, watching her breathe, and felt nothing. No hate, no sadness, just absence. The next morning, I made an appointment with my lawyer. We talked through quiet options, ways to protect the lake house, the accounts, the things she might try to reach for. My lawyer was methodical, cold, efficient. She looked at the paperwork and said, if she contests it, it won't go well for her. You're clean on paper. Very clean. I nodded. That was the point. Sarah had made it easy. She'd withdrawn so fully, she hadn't even thought to dig. She didn't know what accounts I used, what properties I touched, what safeguards I had. She thought I was just harmless, just a man orbiting her son. And that was her mistake. Because men like me, quiet, patient, unseen, we learn to move in the dark. We learn to build exits behind curtains. And when we leave, it isn't loud. It's permanent. Something shifted in her. Not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, like a room losing its light inch by inch without anyone noticing the bulb was dying. She started asking questions again. Casual at first. You working late tonight? Or where'd you put the blue mugs? I answered simply, never offering more than she asked for. She noticed, I think, that I wasn't filling the silence like I used to. I didn't ask about her day, didn't remind her about dinner plans, didn't comment when she came home later than usual or laugh too long at texts from people she never named. One morning, she stood in the doorway watching me pack a small tool bag for the lake house. You've been spending a lot of time over there lately, she said, tilting her head like she was trying to decode a stranger. Yeah, I replied, zipping up the bag. Needed some air. She nodded. You never used to go alone. I never used to need to, I said, then walked past her without waiting for a response. That was the first real crack in her mask. I saw it. The momentary flicker of confusion, like a mirror reflecting back something unfamiliar. She was used to a version of me she could predict. The man who reminded her of her appointments. Who sent flowers on Tuesdays for no reason. Who folded her sweaters the way she liked, even if she never noticed. But that man had left. Quietly, without slamming any doors. And she didn't know how to react to the silence he left behind. A few days later, she tried harder. Made dinner. Lit candles. Played our old playlist on her phone while setting the table. It was all just a little too perfect. I sat down, ate quietly, complimented the food, not because I wanted to, but because I knew what was coming next. She poured me a second glass of wine and said, I miss us. Us. Funny how that word can sound so empty when it's only spoken after everything has already broken. I didn't answer right away, just swirled the wine in the glass and watched her over the rim. What part? I finally asked. The part where you couldn't look at me for months? Or the part where you thought I'd never notice? Her face stiffened, the candlelight flickering in her eyes. I don't know what you're talking about. I smiled. Exactly. That ended the conversation. She went to bed early that night. Didn't say goodnight. Didn't kiss my cheek. Just walked down the hall and shut the door behind her, softly, like she was the one trying not to wake something fragile. The next morning, I loaded a box into the trunk of my car. My father's journal. A few clothes. Some documents. She stood on the porch sipping her coffee, watching me. You moving out? She asked, half joking, half afraid. Just clearing space, I said. For what? I shut the trunk and looked her dead in the eyes. For the truth. Then I got in and drove off, not fast, not dramatically, just forward. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't look back. She didn't ask where I went that day. Didn't text. Didn't call. Not even a question that night when I came home after dark and dropped my keys on the counter like nothing had changed. But I saw it. The way her eyes followed me longer than usual, the stiffness in her shoulders as she stirred her tea. Sarah had always been a woman of control. She managed her image like a brand, polished, curated, unbothered. But cracks were forming. Not big ones. Just hairline fractures beneath the surface. The next week, she started digging. I came home one evening and found the filing cabinet half open. Papers were shifted, not missing, just disturbed. She wasn't in the room when I found it. Probably didn't expect me to notice. But I did. She was looking for something. Answers. Leverage. Evidence that would give her a head start if things fell apart. But she was too late. Everything important was already gone. Moved. Locked down. Account passwords changed. Title transfers completed. Her access quietly revoked before she even realized she had any. At dinner, she casually asked, "When was the last time you checked the joint account?" I shrugged. "Couple weeks ago." "Oh," she said, too lightly. "I think someone might have used it. Could you take a look?" I nodded, but I didn't move. Just kept chewing. Calm. Silent. She couldn't read me anymore. And that terrified her more than anything. Because before, she always knew what to expect. When I'd apologize. When I'd give in. When I'd smooth things over. But I wasn't smoothing anything anymore. I was letting the jagged edges stay jagged. Later that night, she approached me while I was folding laundry in the bedroom. "We should talk," she said. I didn't look up. "About what?" "About us." I finished folding a shirt and placed it in the drawer. "There is no us. Not anymore." That knocked the wind out of her, though she didn't let it show right away. She crossed her arms, mouth tightening. "So what? You're just walking away?" "No," I said, closing the drawer. "I already walked. You just didn't notice." For a moment, she didn't speak. Just stood there, arms wrapped around herself like armor she forgot how to wear. Finally, she whispered, "You're being cruel." I turned to face her fully, my voice low and even. "No, Sarah. You were cruel. I'm just done pretending not to feel it." She left the room. Didn't slam the door. Didn't scream. Just walked out silent. And that silence was louder than any fight we'd ever had. I slept better that night than I had in months. Because when someone stops pretending, sleep comes easy. It means the mask is off. And in the morning, I wouldn't be looking in the mirror wondering if I still recognized the man standing there. Because I did. Finally. The next morning was unusually quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the loaded kind, like the air before a thunderstorm. I sat at the kitchen table sipping coffee when she walked in, hair still wet from the shower, phone clutched in her hand like it was the last thread of her control. She didn't say anything at first. Just stood there staring at me. Then, in a voice too calm to be casual, she said, "I called the bank this morning. I didn't look up. And they said the joint account was closed. That the remaining balance was transferred elsewhere." I took another sip, set the mug down, and finally met her eyes. "Yeah, I took care of that weeks ago." Her mouth opened slightly, just enough for the disbelief to show. "You, what?" "Without telling me." "There wasn't anything to tell," I said. "You stopped contributing to it a long time ago. You can't just." "I did." She stood there frozen, her lips tightening like she was holding back something ugly. But that's the thing about people like Sarah. When they feel the power shift, they don't explode. They implode. Quietly. Slowly. And then they try to claw their way back. She changed tactics. Later that day, she texted me a photo of us from years ago, one of the ones she used to post every anniversary. "Remember this?" was all it said. I didn't reply. That night, she cooked again. Made my favorite, or at least what used to be. Set the table, lit candles, played the same playlist from before. I didn't say anything. Just ate, quietly. Halfway through dinner, she asked, "Why are you doing this?" I didn't pretend not to know what she meant. I just put my fork down, folded my hands, and said, "Because I finally understand what you were building." She blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means I get it now. You wanted someone steady, predictable. A man who doesn't ask questions. Someone who wouldn't notice when your phone started lighting up at midnight or when you started calling me by habit, not heart. That's not fair." "No," I said, my voice calm. "What's not fair is pretending to love someone you stopped seeing years ago." She didn't argue. She just stared at me, stunned, cornered, unraveling. "You think this is all my fault?" "I think it doesn't matter anymore," I said, rising from the table. "Because I'm not here to keep score. I'm here to leave." And I meant it. The next morning, I moved the last of my things into the lake house. Quiet. Clean. No drama. She didn't even ask where I went. But she noticed the missing shoes. The empty drawers. The scent of finality in the air. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the hills, I stood on the back porch of the lake house, the journal in my hand. I opened it, reading one of the last pages my father ever wrote. "There's freedom in being underestimated. Let them forget you. It makes the return sweeter." I closed the book, set it on the table, and looked out over the water. I wasn't lost anymore. I was just unseen. And that, for the first time, felt like power. The silence between us stretched longer than it ever had. No texts. No calls. Not even the awkward, passive-aggressive questions she used to toss my way when she felt me drifting. I thought maybe she had given up, accepted it. But I should have known better. People like Sarah don't accept endings they didn't script themselves. It started small. A voicemail from her lawyer. "We'd like to schedule a time to talk about the lake house ownership details," he said, his voice clipped and professional. I didn't call back. Then came the letter, folded, typed, carefully worded, delivered by courier. She was claiming partial rights to the property, citing marital contributions and emotional investment. I read the whole thing without blinking. Then I walked it out to the fire pit behind the lake house and watched it burn to ash. That evening, I called my attorney. She didn't sound surprised. "I've already filed the necessary counterclaims," she said. "She doesn't have a case." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Let her keep trying. Every move she makes, she just shows her hand. 2 days later, Sarah showed up at the lake house. I was on the porch, repairing a railing post when I heard her car crunch up the gravel drive. She stepped out like she owned the place, wearing that same too-perfect smile she used when meeting new people she wanted to impress. I didn't say anything, just kept working. She walked closer, stopping a few feet away. "This is how you want to do this?" I looked up, sweat on my brow, screwdriver still in hand. "I don't want anything. I'm just not pretending anymore." Her mouth tightened. "You can't just walk away from everything we built." I set the screwdriver down, stood, and faced her. "What did we build, Sarah? A photo album? A performance? A house full of rooms we stopped using? That's not fair." "Stop saying that," I cut in. "Fairness isn't something you cared about when you decided I was optional." She flinched. It was small, but I saw it. And for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. She glanced around the porch. "You know this place was supposed to be ours." "No," I said. "It was my father's. And now it's mine. You never asked about it. Never wanted to come here. You just assumed." Her silence said everything. After a moment, she walked to the edge of the porch, arms crossed, like she needed a moment to recalibrate. "What are you really trying to prove?" "That I don't need to be seen by you to exist," I said softly. "And I don't need your approval to rebuild what you never valued." She turned to face me, eyes sharper now. "You're not the man I married." I smiled just a little. "No, I'm not." "He would have begged you to stay." Then I picked up the screwdriver and went back to the railing. She stood there for a few seconds longer, watching, waiting, hoping maybe I'd change my mind. But I didn't. Because this time, the silence belonged to me. A week passed. I didn't hear from her, not directly. But silence has its own weight. And in that quiet, things began to shift again. My lawyer forwarded me an email Sarah's team had sent, a new claim, this time about shared investments. She was digging through our past like there had to be something she'd missed. A receipt, a signature, a piece of string she could tug on to unravel what I'd built. But there wasn't one. I'd made sure of that long before I packed my first box. The next day, I got a call from an old friend, Evan, the one who'd introduced us years ago. He sounded hesitant. "Hey, just a heads up," he said. "Sarah's been asking around. She called Olivia. Wanted to know if you're seeing anyone." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. "Let her keep asking," I said. "She won't find what she's looking for." And that was the truth. I wasn't out to replace her. I wasn't chasing some dramatic rebound. I was building a life that didn't revolve around convincing someone to see me. That same evening, I stopped by the house to pick up a few books I'd left behind. I didn't call ahead, didn't text, just walked in. She was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone with a glass of wine beside her, red, full, untouched. When she saw me, she stiffened like I'd caught her in something. "You could have called," she said flatly. I didn't think I needed to. I grabbed the books from the shelf and turned to leave, but her voice stopped me. "Is this really it, Daniel?" I turned back, just enough to meet her eyes. "You tell me." She stood up now, her voice rising slightly, that old frustration bubbling back. "You're just walking away? After everything?" "No," I said. "I walked away a long time ago. You just didn't notice until I stopped making noise." Her lips parted, but no words came out. For a second, I saw it, the truth setting in. The realization that the man she'd kept on standby had vanished, and not with fireworks, not with vengeance, but with stillness. "You were always so easy," she muttered. "So quiet. I never had to think about what you needed." "And that's exactly why I'm done," I said. She didn't follow me as I walked out, didn't call my name, didn't slam the door. She just stood there, caught between her image of the man she thought I was and the one she never bothered to learn. Back at the lake house, I placed the books on the shelf, made a cup of coffee, and sat on the porch with my father's journal in my lap. I opened to a page I hadn't read before. Some battles are won not by noise, but by leaving the room and letting them speak into the silence. That night, I didn't dream of her. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to win, because she'd already lost the one thing she never even saw slipping away. Me. It came sooner than I expected. A knock on her door. Mid-morning. A courier in a black jacket, polite but firm. An envelope, thick with paperwork. Inside, reality. Sarah called me 30 minutes later. I let it ring twice before answering. "What is this?" she snapped, skipping pleasantries. "You filed a property release?" "Yeah," I said calmly. "Figured it was time." "You're selling the lake house?" "No," I said. "I'm keeping it. I just had to legally separate it from you before I do anything with it." "You can't do that." It's mine," I cut in. "Title's clean. My name. No claims. You signed off without reading years ago when we refinanced." There was a pause. I could hear her breathing sharp, uneven. "You tricked me." "No," I said. "You ignored me." She hung up. 2 days later, she tried to list our home online, the one she assumed was still in both our names. She made calls, booked consultations, even staged the living room with fresh flowers and strategically angled lamps. But when the real estate agent ran the title search, he called her back with a question she hadn't prepared for. "Why is your name not on the deed?" She called me again that night. This time, she didn't yell. "Did you do this to punish me?" "No," I said. "I did it to stop being invisible." She went silent, like the phone had gone dead. "Sarah," I added after a moment, "you always assumed that you'd always have me, that I'd stay, that I'd never ask questions, that you could leave parts of me out of your life and I'd never notice. I never meant to hurt you." "I know," I said. "That's the saddest part." The next day, I got a call from her lawyer. Short, tense. "She's withdrawing her claims," he said. "No further legal action will be pursued." "Understood," I said. I hung up and walked out to the edge of the lake, barefoot in the sand. The air was cool, crisp. The kind of evening my father used to call honest weather. Nothing hidden, nothing forced. Behind me, the lake house stood quietly. A space once meant to hold us both, now mine, and mine alone. I opened the journal again. There's no greater freedom than not needing to be remembered by someone who never really saw you. I closed it. Inside the house, my things were in place. Simple. Clean. No photos of smiles that didn't last. No echoes of footsteps that never belonged. It was quiet. And that quiet didn't feel empty. It felt earned. She came back 3 days later. I wasn't there. I made sure of that. She used her key, still assuming it worked, and to her surprise, it did. I had never changed the locks. Not because I forgot. Because I wanted her to see what forgetting really looked like. She stepped inside to silence. No coat rack. No framed photos. No scent of her favorite candles. No art on the walls. The living room echoed with her own footsteps. The furniture was gone. Not just moved, removed. Every piece replaced with simplicity. Neutral. Clean. Nothing left of what once was us. Even the rugs had been rolled and donated. In the kitchen, she opened the cabinets. Empty. Stripped of the matching dishes we picked out during that first year of marriage. The monogrammed wine glasses? Gone. The coffee mugs? Replaced with plain ceramic ones, quiet, sturdy, not breakable with names. She walked into the bedroom. The bed was different. No longer ours. Just mine. Clean white sheets, new pillows, no indentation on the left side. No space waiting for her return. On the mirror above the bathroom sink, there was a message. Not scrawled in anger. Not smeared with emotion. Just traced in dust. "I was always here. You just never saw me." I didn't know if she cried. Didn't know if she sat on the edge of the strip bed and thought about the man she used to ignore in plain sight. Didn't care. What I knew was this. She stood inside the house she once thought she owned, and for the first time, realized it never belonged to her. Not really. Ownership isn't paperwork. It's presence. And I had been present for years while she drifted somewhere else. Into filtered photos and double lives. Into a version of herself I no longer recognized. She left the lake house without taking anything, because there was nothing left for her to take. I returned later that evening and found the door locked, untouched. No mess. No dramatics. Just that single message still faint on the mirror. I didn't wipe it off. Not yet. I wanted it to settle in the air for a while longer. A truth that didn't need shouting. A sentence that would echo louder than any goodbye. Outside, the wind picked up over the water. I stepped onto the porch and watched it ripple, steady, effortless. Behind me, the home was finally mine. Not because she walked out, but because I did. And I never looked back. The message on the mirror faded on its own. I never touched it. One morning, I stepped out of the shower, looked up, and it was gone, like it had never been written. Like her presence had finally evaporated from these walls, not with a scream, but with time and silence. It felt fitting. A week later, I got a package in the mail. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. Inside was a photo. Us, back then smiling on a beach, before all the cracks showed. Before I noticed her second phone. Before I found out her girls' trips had 2 sets of footprints in the sand. Taped to the back was a sticky note. Just 4 words. I didn't see you. I stared at it for a while. Not with sadness. Not even anger. Just recognition. She wasn't apologizing. Not really. She was acknowledging. That was new. Maybe even honest. I tossed the photo in the drawer with my father's journal and closed it. Not because I needed to keep it, but because I didn't need to look at it again. The next day, I did something small. Something ordinary. I bought a new welcome mat. Not to welcome anyone specific. Not to invite anyone back in. But because it was mine. Chosen for me. By me. A detail no one else influenced. Later that evening, I grilled on the back deck, barefoot and alone, the lake catching the last orange slant of the sun. I watched the trees ripple with wind, listened to the faint hum of cicadas. I wasn't waiting for a phone call. Wasn't checking for missed texts. Wasn't wondering what she was doing or who she was with. I was here. Fully. And for the first time in years, I wasn't performing. I didn't need to be impressive. Or perfect. Or useful. I just needed to exist in a space that saw me. That heard me. And this house, this quiet, clean, honest house, did exactly that. I poured a drink. Sat down with the journal. Opened to the last blank page and wrote just one line. I am no longer invisible. Then I closed it. Permanently. Because this wasn't a story about revenge. It never was. It was a story about seeing yourself again after everyone else stopped looking. About learning that being overlooked isn't the same as being worthless. It's just a signal. A sign to leave the room where your voice is ignored and build a life where your silence is respected. She thought I disappeared. But no. I finally arrived.